Hey YouTube, and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Profits. As always, we thank you so much for being here. Let's just get right into it. This is our running back rankings 2.0. So this is basically our rankings from before. Of course, they're changed around, and we're going to update and try to add. If these players are the same players, just in a different order. So we're going to try to add more information. And if you've seen our first video, you're still definitely going to want to watch this. But we left in some of the old information from the first video in case you haven't, and just get an overall feel for the player. Now, we're only going to do the top 25 players this video, and we're going to do a part 2 to this. Simply, it just takes too long. This video is probably going to be over an hour. I'm almost guaranteeing that it's going to be over an hour, though we don't know. We're just filming it right now. But we don't want to film 2 hours straight, 2.5 hours, and it takes a lot. And so we're going to do this now, post it, and then we'll get to the other one later. But we're going to do this in standard leagues, of course, and then, of course, the most important thing is the tiers. If a guy is number 2 and another guy's number 3 and you have them flipped, it doesn't really matter. That's not that big of a deal. What matters is more important is the information and the research behind it, and that's hopefully what we do well. That's why we're here, and then the tiers. If you flip guys around within the tier, that's fine. Like, we totally agree we're loose within a tier, but if you have guys bumped around from one tier to another, that starts to make a really big difference. Tier philosophy is huge in the way that we play fantasy football because we want to give people freedom, we want to give ourselves freedom, but we also have to understand that there's a cutoff and some guys are better than others and so on. Rob, if you don't have anything to say, we can get right into it.
Yeah, a couple quick things here. One, when we look at tier systems, obviously that's so important. And when we talk about information, some of you, this is going to be redundant. We're going to talk about this. If you didn't watch our previous video, we're going to have some of that information. But we have some new information out there for you. And what you need to do, anytime we do a video, we always tell you, take our information and put in the context of your league. Every league is different. Scoring systems are different. And so we're giving you some things to consider, but you have to take that and contextualize that for you. Also, I want to just take a moment to give a shout out to all Bears fans. We're actually in Cedar Lake, Indiana, right on the border of Illinois. So we're actually in Bear territory. So all you Bears fans out there, hi. Anyway, so let's just get right into it. We have a lot of guys we want to cover. I'm excited to get into our running back video. See, for me, running backs is where often you win and lose your league. So this is so important. This is the hardest position to make up. If you don't have a good draft, or if you have some injuries, something like that, this is the one that is very difficult to make up for. So want to get into it?
Yeah, we'll just get right into it. All right, so our first running back, number 1, is Todd Gurley. And for me, this is very simple. I don't know if there's a whole lot to say about it. Last year, 19 touchdowns, over 2,000 yards, 64 receptions. I mean, good frame, good running back. I have no concerns with him. I think that he's very, very good. I like the way he fits in that system, and that offense is just good enough. They lean on him to give him the ball enough to be a good fantasy option, but they're also just good enough that they're not a detriment to him, and they're able to do things to keep the ball moving. But Rob, why do you have Gurley number 1? Why do you like about him?
Yeah, so we got Todd Gurley number 1 in this video, and we had him number 1 in the first video we did. For me, though, what he does actually solidifies his position as the number 1 guy, and the reason why is concerns over Bell sitting out the preseason, but we'll actually get to that in a little bit. So for me, I like Todd Gurley for a lot of reasons. One, he's got consistent touchdown output. If you look in his career, 35 touchdowns in 44 games, that's 0.8 touchdowns per game. That's very good. Now, some people think, well, he can't repeat 19 again. They're expecting a fall off, but it's really not unprecedented to see a running back come out and actually improve his touchdown totals. I want to give you a couple examples. Priest Holmes played for Kansas City back in the day, had 24 touchdowns one year, followed up next year at 27. Emmitt Smith had 22, followed up with 25, and Sean Alexander had 20 and followed up with 28. All of those guys improved, so it's not unprecedented that he could actually improve those numbers a bit there. Last year, had over 2,000 total yards. He's 6'1", 227. Like you said, he's a big physical back. He can handle the wear and tear in the NFL, but he's also got decent hands, so he can come out on third downs and passing situations. Like, that's really important. You talk about being out in passing situations. Since his rookie season, he's actually improved. His catches have increased. 21 his rookie year, went up to 43, and then last year 64. Subsequently, he also improved his receiving yards, and last year had 6 receiving touchdowns. So there's really no glaring weakness in his game. Now, he had a bad sophomore season, and really that's a concern. Like, okay, he had a great rookie year. Sophomore, I think his yards per carry down to 3.3. He really struggled. I chalk that up to Jeff Fisher, his bad coaching, and really Jared Goff being a rookie. Before we get more into that, what's your take on that? Anything you want to add?
Well, I agree with you. It had nothing to do with Todd Gurley whatsoever. Jared Goff only threw 5 touchdowns his rookie year to 7 interceptions and 5 fumbles. So he had over twice as many turnovers as he did touchdowns. And in fact, it wasn't just Goff's fault. They also didn't have any wide receivers. They didn't have Robert Woods. They didn't have Cooper Kupp. Last year they had Sammy Watkins, who they didn't have that year that Gurley struggled. And so the passing game was just that bad that if you're a defense, I mean, it seems so obvious when we're saying it, and sometimes when we talk about things in these videos, you know, as an NFL coach, maybe it can be more complex and there's more going on, but like it was obvious when you were playing the Rams, you just focused on Todd Gurley because that passing game wasn't doing anything. So that's one thing where a lot of times guys have a bad year and we get concerned. For Todd Gurley, at least for me, it wasn't a concern. It wasn't his fault at all.
Yeah. You know, Todd Gurley, a lot of things I like about him. One, he's very competitive like so many guys in the NFL. He's very intense offseason workouts. He's been working out with Saquon Barkley. Looks great. Another thing, the second half of last year, Todd Gurley actually got better as the year went on. He got stronger. I think that bodes well for him. I think they got great weapons around him. You know, you mentioned Cooper Kupp, Woods. They brought in Cooks this year. I think that along with the fact that you can expect that Jared Goff's going to improve this year. If you look at Jared Goff last year, look at our quarterback video, and he actually struggled a little bit against good defense. So I think you can see him continue to evolve there and get better. For me, he's our number one guy. I feel very safe. I had the number one pick. He's the guy that I would roll with. Anything else?
No, I think that about sums it up. What about our number 2 guy now, Ezekiel Elliott? He's had 25 touchdowns in his first 25 games. He's looked so good. We're looking through all these comments. Everyone's we got a lot of people like, he's my number 1 guy. He's so great. We love him. He's going to take off this year. He's so awesome. But like, are there any concerns, Rob? Is there anything that says, well, maybe we should stay away? Maybe he could bump down lower, or is he number 2 solid for sure?
Okay, so, you know, it's funny. There are obviously a lot of Dallas Cowboy fans out there because a number of you told us that he's your number 1 guy. I like him. I don't like him number 1, although he has bumped up. I think in our last rankings he was number 3. Now we got him number 2, and I'll tell you why in a bit. It really comes down to Le'Veon Bell looking to sit out the preseason, so that's why we kind of flip-flop him a little bit in the rankings there. Now, he did have a fall off in production last year, so what was going on there is you can't deny it. He had a major dip in his yards per carry. Was that concerning? Well, honestly, I think why he had a fall off in production and why he struggled, I think you could attribute it to the fact that he had constant back and forth of the pending suspension. The moment by moment ups and downs, not knowing if he'd be playing, I think it made it nearly impossible for him to prepare mentally and physically each game. I think that's out of the way now. I think another thing right now that really helps him is he benefits from arguably the best offensive line in football. If they aren't the best, they're certainly top 5. They're very good. Last year, they're kind of banged up. That offensive line is very healthy right now. Now, if you look at his last 6 games before the suspension, before that suspension took place, he was averaging 118 rushing yards per game. That's excellent production. That projects out to be 1,888 yards over 16 games. That's great. Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I don't think he's got great hands. I wouldn't say he has excellent hands, but I would think he's got good hands, good enough that he's not a detriment in the passing game. He's much bigger and more physical than Bell and Gurley, and I think that's good because that's going to ensure he gets a lot of red zone carries, like you had mentioned, 25 touchdowns, 25 games. I think that's not a fluke. That's what he's going to do. He's a big physical back. He's going to get the rock in the 5-yard line around those areas there. So there's no real glaring holes in his games. If I have any concern with him, to me, the biggest concern I have is a lack of weapons and wide receivers there. I think a lot of teams, when they play him, are going to try to stack the box. So that's probably the biggest concern. With that said, I feel very good with him in our number 2 spot. Although you could bump him up and down a little bit, he's definitely a tier 1 guy.
Yeah. Well, one thing we talk about, every guy in this tier 1, these top 6 guys, they're elite, they're very talented, they're very good. I don't like to spend a lot of time talking these guys up because you know that. You're not dumb, right? So what is like the one concern that I have with Ezekiel Elliott? And this isn't necessarily a concern I have compared to him and the rest of the league, but simply that everyone else in this elite category beats him. And that is just receptions. He only had 29 receptions last year. He was on pace for 35 had he played the whole season. Against a lot of running backs in the NFL, that's fine. That's not a concern against most people. But against Todd Gurley, who got 64 last year, 85 by Le'Veon Bell, 82 and 80 by Kamara and McCaffrey. Like, when you just compared him to those other guys, like, he does come short. I still think he's a tier 1 guy. Maybe he's a bit lower than 2, but in this range is certainly reasonable. I don't think it's a stretch to put him 3 or 4 or 2. I think that anywhere around there works great. I don't know if any team in the NFL has such a combination of a good runner and a good offensive line. They have a top 5 offensive line, if not the best offensive line in the NFL. And like you said, he runs physical. He's a tank. He's so good. So, yeah, I think that maybe I'd put him 3 or 4, but especially, of course, if Bell does not hold out. But yeah, that's where I've got him. What about David Johnson now?
Yeah, before we get to Dave Johnson, it's funny you talk about his catches. Where I look at Ezekiel Elliott, I think he could progress in the passing and get better. I could see him ending up somewhere in the low 40s in terms of catches. And the reason why, if you look at Todd Gurley, later on we'll talk about Melvin Gordon. Those guys, when they came in the league, they didn't have a lot of catches. They got better. Unfortunately, I think we get a little spoiled. You see what Christian McCaffrey did and what Alvin Kamara, 80 and 81 catches. That is very rare. I mean, they were phenomenal, and so it sets the bar pretty high. But yeah, so like David Johnson, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what about, I mean, unless you want to talk more about Elliott, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Like, what about David Johnson? Why is he number 3?
Yeah, number 3 for me. Okay, I look at David Johnson. He, a lot like Ezekiel, has a nose for the end zone. In 2015 and 16, he had 12 and 20 touchdowns. His first 2 years, he's had 32 TDs in 33 games played. So he's got the guy gets the ball in the red zone, so that's huge. He's got great hands. I look at Bell, Christian McCaffrey, and Alvin Kamara, but beyond that, he's probably got the best hands in terms of what running backs go out there. In fact, you look at 2016, he had 80 catches. That's really good. And then last year, he had 6 catches in the first game before he hurt his wrist. And by the way, according to all reports out there, his wrist is healthy. He's going to be ready for week 1. He looks good there. He made a comment. He said, no, he's setting the bar kind of high, but I think it's attainable. Here's what David Johnson said his goal is. He would like to, in the same season, have 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving in the same year. I think that's actually realistic. I'm not saying he's going to do it, but I think it's realistic. I think it's possible or plausible, whatever you want to say. 2016, he had a total of 2,118 yards. He had a total of 1,239 rushing yards and 879 receiving yards. So I don't think that's not that difficult. Now, I'm going to get into some concerns for a bit. If you want to add anything before I get to my concerns with him?
Yeah, well, I think for me, I have 2 concerns, really 2 main, 3 concerns. The first is the team around him. That offensive line is not great. That quarterback situation is not great. Those receivers are not great. I wonder if, we talked about what happened to Todd Gurley a couple of years ago, if that could happen to David Johnson. Probably not to that extent, but definitely to enough to limit him. Another thing we talk about is, like last year, Todd Gurley had 77 targets. The year that David Johnson went out, he had that awesome season. He had like 20 touchdowns. He had 120 targets in the passing game. That seems really high to me. I would not be at all surprised if that got a lot lower, if that came down to, 100, 105, 110. So that's a concern. And then my final concern is he's had 10 fumbles in the last basically 2 seasons, one of which he wasn't even the full-time starter. He was still earning that role, and he was still emerging as a running back in the NFL, I believe in 2015. And so you do have to wonder, like, he's having trouble holding on to the football. 10, that's basically 5 in 2 seasons, or 5 per season. That definitely concerns me a little bit, but you also have some concerns, so what are they?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Those fumbles are a concern. His targets might drop, but I do think he's looking at either Josh Rosen or Sam Bradford as his quarterback. Now, one's a rookie, and typically rookie quarterbacks, they'll sometimes keep the play callings conservative, allow check down throws at tight ends, running backs, things like that for a rookie quarterback to get adjusted. If that's the case, that bodes well for him as a running back that catches the ball out of the backfield. Sam Bradford, on the other hand, he's another guy who likes to throw high percentage throws. A couple years ago from Minnesota, he set the completion record, and he's a guy who actually threw a lot to tight ends and running backs. So I think that kind of bodes well for him there. If they do struggle, they fall behind, whatever it is, we'll see. Concerns I have is yards per carry are not great. For his career, they're 4.3, but I think that's due mostly to poor offensive line play. Last year, they're particularly bad. In fact, they received a poor rating in Sabermetrics. The offensive line was brutal. Now, there are signs that could improve this year. Last year, they had a big injury to left tackle DJ Humphries. Sounds like he's going to be healthy for week 1. They also signed Justin Pugh in free agency. That's another huge upgrade on the offensive line. And then they drafted a guy named Cole out of Michigan who started 51 consecutive games for them. He can play center, left tackle. So I think that's going to help improve that offensive line. They can't get much worse than they were last year. But Dave's ability, even if they do struggle to run the ball, Dave's ability to catch the ball in the backfield, keep him on the field, keep him relevant. He may not have great production numbers, but he'll definitely be a good volume play. Now, another concern, like you talked about, is the quarterback situation. You've got a quarterback, or you have a quarterback that's a rookie, or another quarterback who honestly just cannot stay healthy there. So with that said, there are certainly concerns, but I've still got to put him in that tier 1 ranking at this point. So,
yeah, well, I completely agree with you. I think that about sums it up. Now we'll talk about like Le'Veon Bell. Here's a guy who a lot of people might think that 4 is low. Of course, you know why we have him at 4. He could easily go up to the number 2 spot, but let's just talk about it. Why is he 4 right now?
Yeah, okay, so he's number 4. We'll get to that a little bit. Last year he had a good year. He did see a dip in production. He had a yards per carry of 4.0. That's the lowest since his rookie year. So that's a major decline statistically there. What happened? Should we be concerned? Well, here's why I think he had a dip in production. He started slower last year because he missed the entire preseason. He held out. He didn't like the franchise tag. He wanted a long-term contract, and so he held out. And it really took him like 3 weeks to get into playing shape and hit on all cylinders. In fact, the first 2 games back, he had a yards per carry of 3.2. That's brutal. And that really just dragged down his stats the rest of the year. Take those 2 games out of his yards per carry. I sat around, I think, around 4.5, something like that for the year. For me, of all the running backs, he's really the safest, consistent, reliable back in leagues in terms of production. I do have concerns at him being healthy at times. Where he really excels, though, like a lot of the guys that we've talked about early on, is he's great in the passing game. In PPR leagues, you got to bump this guy up considerably. In 3 of the last 4 years, when Bell is healthy, he's averaged 91 catches per season. When you project his per game, averages out over 16 games. In the previous 3 years, before last year, he had yards per carry of 4.9, 4.7, 4.9, so he was good there. And it feels like this guy's been around for a long time, but he's still only 26 years old. He's got a lot of good years ahead of him. And I think here's what I love, too, by the way. Unlike David Johnson, he benefits from having Big Ben there, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, so teams, it's going to be hard for them to load the box to shut him down. And so I like that. Now, here's why we moved him. He was number 2 in our rankings. We moved him to number 4. Is because the reports are that he's going to sit out again this year, just like he did last year. And it means he could report to camp. It might take him a couple games to get in game playing shape. That could hurt him statistically. If he does report, you got to move him back up to number 2 in standards, and I would probably say number 1 in PPR leagues if he does report early for camp and he hasn't playing shape. So.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with that analysis. You know, for me, I guess there are the 3 things. You know, the one is that he hasn't reported. Last year, he spent the first few games of the season struggling because of that. Like you said, 3.2 yards per carry and 9.5 receiving yards per game. Both of those are shockingly low for Le'Veon Bell, a guy who's been so dominant for quite a few years now. Of course, he's played 5 years in the NFL, and only once has he played a full 16 games. That's another thing that makes me nervous. Of course, everyone struggles with injury, but basically you're getting a guy who's hurt 4 out of the 5 years, at least at some point. That's not terrible. Most of the time he's only hurt for a game or 2. But as he gets older and older, that'll start to be more of a concern. However, he's far from an old running back right now, so that's only a very minor concern. And then finally, last year he had a 4.0 yards per carry. Now that would be boosted when you cut out the early games where he was getting back into it because he was holding up. But he still only had a yards per carry of 4.3 over his career. Simply, that does not compare to a lot of other great running backs. Kareem Hunt, 4.9 last year. Todd Gurley, 4.6. Mark Ingram, 4.9. Alvin Kamara, 6.1. And so he definitely is lower on that. Now, I think that's simply because he's so dominant. Teams key in on him. Of course, they know he's going to be great. They're never sleeping on Le'Veon Bell, and he makes up for it in just bulk. He catches the ball so much, he runs the ball so much, he gets the ball around the end zone so much that he certainly makes up for that in a lot of ways. But I guess those are just 3 minor concerns to note when you're looking at this guy. The biggest thing, though, hands down, has got to be he's just got to report to camp. He's got to do it.
All right.
So, what about Alvin Kamara now? The hype is real big on this guy.
Yeah, the fantasy football world's in love with this guy. He's getting so much attention, and I know why. The guy was electric last year. He ended with a yards per carry of 6.1. He had 13 touchdowns and 81 catches and over 1,500 total yards. Those are good numbers for a rookie right there. Okay, but what makes that even more amazing is that last year, for the first few games, he was third on a depth chart behind Adrian Peterson and Mark Ingram. After Adrian Peterson got traded, he really took off, and so his numbers could have been even better. He split carries. Now, I think Mark Ingram hurts his value a little bit. I think when it's all said and done, that Mark Ingram is going to get more carries on average per game, and I'll get to that in a little bit here. Now, I know a lot of people are excited because Ingram's suspended for 4 games, and they're bumping Kamara into the top 3. To me, that's just a little bit too high to be bumping this guy. Now, the suspension does increase Kamara's value, but hear me when I say this. Okay, I believe very strongly in what I'm about to say here. The Saints are not going to risk wearing Kamara down too much. They have playoff aspirations, obviously. This team that wants to go far in the playoffs. Last year, they looked pretty good. Almost beat my Vikings, but Stephon Diggs obviously ended that playoff run. So they're not going to risk Alvin Kamara. He's too valuable in the passing game. And so they're not going to let Alvin Kamara become a running back that's going to carry the ball 20, 25 times a game, and that's just not going to happen. So when Ingram comes back, I think he's going to get a majority of the carries, or he's going to get more carries than Kamara. And you also have to consider the fact that Ingram, with 4 games, is only missing 30% of the fantasy season. And when he comes back, I think they're ready to give Kamara a rest. I think Kamara has a high ceiling, but for me, he's just not top 3 to 4 quite yet with Ingram there. So that's my take on the guy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think, wow, he was great, but he did it in actually a fairly small amount of touches, and he's going to get more carries and catches, and he's going to take off this year and be better than last year. I wouldn't be surprised if he got the ball more and did the exact same that he did. I think a lot of people think that more touches means more stats, better fantasy season. Well, that's not always the case. For a slightly small running back in Alvin Kamara, he's not too tiny. I don't think it's going to ruin his career or anything like that. I think that it will slow him down at 5'10", 215 pounds. Again, he is a bit small. So last year he had 13 touchdowns and 201 touches. That's one touchdown every 15 times he got the ball. That's insane. Last year, Todd Gurley, who had 19 touchdowns, he was the man last year, and I think he'll be the man this year, had 19 touchdowns and 343 touches. So that's one touchdown every 18 touches. So Kamara was actually more efficient than Todd Gurley. So first of all, I don't imagine he's going to be the most efficient player with as much bulk as a lot of these other guys. But this isn't a guess. We've seen this in the past before. Lamar Miller in 2015 had 194 attempts, 4.5 yards per carry, and 8 TDs. In 2016, he bumped up to 268 attempts, but only 4.0 yards per carry and 5 touchdowns. So more carries, but lower yards per carry, lower touchdowns. Miller's not the only example. Another one is Clinton Portis. In 2003, he had 290 carries, almost 1,600 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, and 14 TDs. The very next year, he gets far more carries. He gets 343 carries, 1,300 yards, 3.8 yards per carry, and only 5 touchdowns. So he significantly dropped off with 9 less touchdowns despite getting about 53 more carries. So I think that a lot of people expect he's going to take off. I imagine he's going to be right where he was last year. Definitely in this elite status, but not number one, not the guy. So what about Kareem Hunt? I think he's being extremely underrated right now.
Yeah, I'm surprised. What more do you have to do to be considered a great back and get attention? This guy was phenomenal last year. He was a surprise for the Chiefs and for a lot of fantasy owners. Now he goes into this year, he's really their number one guy there. He's a guy that can do all things in the offense. He can be involved. He's a true 3-down back, honestly. Last year won the rushing title with 1,327 yards. He had 11 TDs, 53 catches for a rookie. By the way, that's really, really good. That beats a lot of guys out there that we've previously talked about in terms of catches of rookie season. He had 455 receiving yards. He's another back that has no real glaring weaknesses in their name. If there was a weakness, and I'm really splitting hairs with this one here, it's maybe that he's a little undersized. Now, with that said, he's not small, he's just not big. Okay, so you wonder, can he take the wear and tear in the NFL? Now, he did wear down a stretch last year. That offense struggled quite a bit, but Andy Reid actually came out publicly and said that was his problem. That was his fault that the offensive struggled. He kind of took credit for that, and so he's kind of saying that he has all the confidence in Hunt this year. There's a good article out there. We have it on our website. Kansas City actually posted. I'm not saying I agree with everything there, but it's definitely a good read. It's an analytic that actually argues that Hunt was better last year than Kamara. It breaks down yards after contact, how many times you avoided hits, things like that. In fact, I think you actually have some stats on that. I'll let you get to that a little bit here, but I love this guy. He's fallen really far in drafts, surprisingly, and I'll be happy if he falls to me. In fact, if I'm in a 12-team league, I hope I get to pick around 7 or 8. He'll probably fall to me, and then I can flip back around and load up on a wide receiver. I can't believe he's not getting more attention, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's hard for me to not put a guy in this top tier when he is wins the league rushing title, the most yards. I mean, that right there is enough for us to say maybe he should be up here. And then we talk about that 4.9 yards per carry is very, very good. He wasn't just a bulk guy. He was getting the job done. One of the reasons he was so effective, he set a rookie running back record for most missed tackles forced. He forced 77 missed tackles. That's insanely high. On top of that, like you mentioned, he had 53 or 58 was it receptions last year. That's really high. When you look at his college, he was not trained in college to be a receiving running back. In fact, in college, how many receptions do you think he averaged a season?
You know what? Honestly, I have no idea.
18.
18.
18. He comes in the NFL and just a running guy, and Kansas City says, we're going to teach you to catch the ball. And he goes from 18 in college up to kind of the big leagues, and he gets up there in the 50s. I wouldn't be surprised, because it was his first year, I wouldn't be surprised if he made improvements and cracked up there into that 65 catches range. On top of that, again, is that real combination of total carries and targets. He had 272 carries, 63 targets. So basically he's getting 335 opportunities with the ball to do something. And when he was making it happen. Like I said, all those catches on a 4.9 yards per carry. He finds the end zone with 11 touchdowns last year. I would argue, and maybe it's just me, I personally like him more than Alvin Kamara. I'm going to get a lot of hate for that. Feel free to leave me a comment about how dumb I am. But for me, I have him one ahead of Kamara. Close, but slight edge to Hunt in my book.
Yeah, in the initial rankings, we actually had Hunt ahead of Kamara. We did flip them after the Ingram suspension, what happened after our rankings. But honestly, I could go back and forth with either one of those guys. I'd be happy to get either one. In some ways, I feel a little bit safer with Hunt because he doesn't have any real legitimate competition there. Now, the one downside, people might argue that Pat Mahomes might hurt him a little bit. Defenses could load the box. But the other side of it, you could argue, is they may lean more heavily on him to take pressure off their second-year quarterback, Pat Mahomes. So
yeah. Well, that's our tier 1. Guys, it's so obvious. Any of these top 6 guys you should be thrilled to have. They're very safe picks, very solid options. But let's get into our tier 2. All right, so first overall, the first guy in the second tier is Melvin Gordon. He was a lot lower in this, but I just keep bumping him up, moving him up. I don't know about you, but I'm just more excited about him as I've done more research on him. The 6'1", 215-pound, 25-year-old running back for the San Diego Chargers is a really great option. He has no competition there. He is the guy. Over the last 2 seasons, he's averaged over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns with 50 catches and about 450 receiving yards, so fairly solid. On top of that, and you mentioned this earlier, he has a reputation for not being a good receiving running back, but he has been increasing that and getting better at that. I believe you want to talk about that, how he's increased, or do you just want me to talk about it?
Go ahead, you can talk about the increase, yeah.
So we'll look at this. In 2015, he had 37 targets, 33 catches, 192 yards, and no touchdowns. In 2016, he goes out 41 targets. I must have a typo here. It says 41 catches. Obviously, he didn't catch every time he was targeted, but it was an increase. I'll try to leave something in the description down below. I guess I messed up my notes. But anyways, 419 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And then last year, 83 targets, 58 catches, 476 yards, and 4 TDs. So every year that he's been in the NFL, he has increased his ability to catch the ball and help his team. He ranked 6th in receptions and 5th in targets in 2017. In fact, I think that far surpasses what people expected of him. I really like him. And then I guess the last thing I have to say, and before I hand him over to you, is that 3.9 yards per carry is about the only concern that I had for him. But then you look back and understand that the San Diego Chargers had the 31st or second to worst run blocking offensive line in the NFL. Well, they just added Mike Pouncey center. I think that should help a lot. They should be much improved.
Yeah, that's the only concern. This guy's a huge volume play. I like him. I do have concerns about his yards per carry, but there's a lot of other factors on why a running back may struggle there. I think they're going to improve in that area. Now, usually, if your yards per carry is under 4, which it is for his career, that's what kind of the football's version of the Mendoza line. In baseball, the Mendoza line is 200 if you're below that, But anyways, that's kind of football's version. If you're below 4.0, usually you don't see the field a lot, and you have a limited career. But every once in a while, a running back will come along, and he will be a good volume play his entire career. So even if the offensive line doesn't improve, I think even as a volume play, he'll be solid. A guy very similar to that is Eddie George. In 9 seasons, only twice he had yards per carry of over 4. He ended up with a career yards per carry of 3.6. Jerome Bettis was also that same way. Now, the difference between Melvin Gordon and those guys, he's not as big as those guys, he's not as physical, but he has much better hands. He's definitely more involved in the passing game, and so I think that actually bodes well for him. And so, you look, he only made 22 receptions at Wisconsin. You already talked about the improvements that he's made, but the coach went on to talk about how he's worked so hard to improve his hands in the passing game. They've done quite a bit, and they're going to continue to see increase in targets, receptions, and touchdowns, they believe, this year. So.
Yeah, exactly. So now what about Saquon Barkley? He's 8 overall, number 2 guy in the tier 2 rookie. He keeps moving up the charts. What do you think about him?
Okay, so the fantasy world and football world's in love with this guy, and so am I. I love Saquon Barkley quite a bit. He's a stud. He has no deficiencies in his game. He's another true three-down back. Now, back in April, here's what we said in April, and it's already been beaten this. In April, we said that the hype is growing. By the time fantasy drafts come around in August, he'll be drafted in most fantasy leagues in the second round. In some bigger leagues, he'll sneak into the first round easily. Mark my word, personally, I usually play close to the vest, but I would grab him late in the first round in 12-team leagues or higher. That was written in April. Well, you can just forget that because he's already in mock drafts moved into the first round. Where is he at now currently? Do you remember that? I think somewhere.
Yeah, I believe right now he's going 5th overall.
Yeah.
He's going before Antonio Brown or any wide receivers being taken. I think that's a bit too high. Clearly, you agree. We both agree. That's why he's in this tier 2. That's why he's 8 overall. But man, the hype is real on him. It's weird to think that a rookie running back might not be there at the 6th pick in the draft.
Yeah, I love this guy, but I will get there. I think there's a few, I don't know if I want to call it a concern, but just something to try to kind of cool on the hype a little bit. But I do love this guy. He couldn't have landed in a better situation playing for the Giants. That's half the battle. The offensive Giants improved their offensive line a lot in free agency this last offseason. They had a struggle in offensive line last year, and that was before they drafted Will Hernandez in the second round. He has no real competition for his job, and they have great weapons around him: Odell Beckham, Shepard, Ingram. He's not going to see a lot of 8-man boxes. I could easily see this guy total of 1,500 yards and 10-plus TDs, nothing from him. I love him. But I will say this, okay? Even though I can't remember last time I saw a guy leaving college that looked this ready for the NFL in terms of running backs go like this guy here, I think we have to be careful about the overhype. You know, remember the saying, a bird in the hand is better than, a bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. Kind of heard that saying before, right? Currently, he's actually, some people are passing up some proven running backs in mock drafts and taking this guy. And he's getting that label of a can't miss. But there's been other guys in the NFL that have came with that same label. I think about Trent Richardson, Lawrence Phillips, Kajana Carter, Curtis Enos, Cedric Benson, who are all considered first-round guys that were can't misses, and you know what? They struggled. And so I would say I absolutely love this guy, but be careful that the hype doesn't cause you to pass another proven running back. So, like for me, I feel good with him at the number 8 spot. I don't feel better bumped up and higher because even though he's talented, he's got a ton of skill, he is still a rookie who has never played a snap in the NFL.
Yeah, well, you know, we look at these rookies, they're not stats for us to pull from his previous NFL experience. It just doesn't exist. It's not there. But I love numbers. I don't have this memorized, so I'm going to read off some notes that I took here fairly recently before we started filming this, just about how impressive he's been in the combine. So he benched 225 pounds 29 times, tied for most by any running back. Barkley's 10-yard split was a blazing 1.54 seconds. That was 1/100th of a second better than Buccaneers wide receiver Deshaun Jackson in the combine. His 40-yard dash was 4.4 seconds, the second best time among running backs. Devin Hester, known as the fastest kick returner in NFL history, had a time of 4.43 in 2006. So actually, Barkley is faster than Devin Hester. And then finally his vertical. At 41-inch vertical, he beats out Julio Jones, who only had a 38.5-inch vertical in 2011. I mean, he go out there and he's comparing himself and beating Deshaun Jackson, Julio Jones, Devin Hester. I mean, so impressive. The physicality, all those things, they are there. So I like him more than I've liked a rookie running back in a very long time. But what about this next guy who I don't like quite as much, Leonard Fournette. I just have some concerns with that team.
Yeah, you know, I do too. I do have some concerns for this guy, but yet I also think he's a very, very good running back. The former first-round, 4th overall pick had a very good year last year. Finished with 10 touchdowns and over 1,000 rushing yards in 13 games. He also had a huge game in the postseason against the Steelers. We had 109 rushing yards and 3 TDs. Just kind of just a reminder how talented he can be. Now, the problem that he had last year is he had 6 games, he had 100 yards rushing, but other games he disappeared and struggled a lot. There were stretches of inconsistency and injuries. Now, the one thing he did in the offseason that I like is in the offseason he's lost 11 pounds. He recently told John Reed of the News Journal, I feel like I play my best weight at 223, 224. That's the way I played in college at LSU. I don't know why. I don't want to just be average. I want to be above average. I want to be the greatest one to play this game. First of all, I love when guys say that. I don't want arrogance, but I do like a guy that strives to be great and has confidence. He goes on to say, I feel lighter, quicker. I have a lot of my burst back. So he lost some weight in the offseason. I think that bodes well for him. My concerns for this guy is probably what you're going to say. Blake Bortles. I know some of you are going to hate me for saying that. Sorry, I got to be real here. When teams play the Jags, they folks shut down Leonard Fournette. Back in 2017, he led all running backs. He faded loaded boxes 49% of the times he carried the ball. 49% of the times when he ran the ball, he faced 8-man boxes. That doesn't bode well. With that said, I think he's got too much talent. I think he's too big and too physical. I think they want to run the ball. I think he's got a very high ceiling and a very safe floor. That's where I've got him.
Yeah, well, 3.9 yards per carry, like you said, some guys can overcome that. Melvin Gordon overcomes that. What you have to see is a guy who can find the end zone a lot and a guy who's healthy, who can make up for that in a lot of bulk. Now, this is, of course, being dramatic, but he's been injured for 100% of the seasons. He's had some sort of injury that he's played in the NFL. And, of course, he's only played 1 year. That's just a joke, but he's been injured in college. He's had a history of it. He's not a healthy guy. So you want him to have really low efficiency and really high bulk and expect him to not continue to struggle with injuries. That's a big concern for me. When half the time he's facing 8-man boxes, that's another big concern for me. I don't like that offense. Those receivers aren't fantastic. That quarterback isn't great. For me, honestly, I'd probably bump him below Devonta Freeman at least. Maybe even below Cook and Howard. But again, in this tier, it doesn't matter. They're all very similar. I guess the difference between him and some of these other guys around him is that he is safer. He's got a lower ceiling, but also a higher floor. And so I think that's a solid pick. I like where you have him. I might move him slightly, but that's a great spot.
I'm not huge on where he's at there. The problem that I have after is, got Devonta Freeman. I love the guy, but you got Coleman there taking carries. Dalvin Cook's coming off an injury. And Jordan Howard, if he could be better in the passing game, and we'll get to him in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting to get some question marks, although these are all still very solid backs.
Yeah. All right. Well, now we'll move on. We can talk about, what about Devonta Freeman?
Yeah, so Devonta Freeman last 3 years, in 45 games played, he scored 35 touchdowns. In 2015, he had 14. 2016, he had 13. Those are impressive numbers. This guy finds the end zone, especially when you consider he's only 205 pounds. He's on the smaller size, but he still finds the end zone. He's averaged 54 catches the last 3 years. That's very good numbers and bumps up his PPR value quite a bit. If you're in PPR leagues, Freeman's a guy you're going to want to bump up there. Now, the concerns I have for him, he's a little bit smaller, 206 pounds. Other backs that are small in terms of size had durability issues, and last year he was banged up often. In fact, he's had 2 recent concussions, which for me are probably the most concerning in the NFL. There's such a concern with CTE right now and concussions, so those 2 recent concussions are a little bit concerning for me. Another concern I have is Tevin Coleman. His backup is very good. The team doesn't need to press Freeman into action in games when he's banged up. They can and have limited his carries a little bit. And then along the way, Coleman has actually vultured 19 touchdowns the last 2 years. So it's a little bit of a concern for me there. With that said, it's impossible to ignore his production. In fact, if you look at it, in 2015, he was #1 in fantasy points scored for running backs. He was very good. He led all running backs in scoring that year. So this is a guy that's very solid. He's a very good Tier 2 running back.
Yeah, I like what you said. In 2015, he was the #1 fantasy running back. We know that he can do it. I actually think he's very consistent. He's one of just 4 running backs who, in the last 3 seasons, have placed top 10 in carries and targets every year. Those other guys being Le'Veon Bell, LeSean McCoy, and Melvin Gordon. I also like that Freeman has been top 10 in red zone carries, attempts inside the 10-yard line, and rushes inside the 5-yard line each of the last 3 years. So he's extremely productive there. And last year in 2017, he ranked 13 in red zone looks. You talk about, he's very productive. He's very talented. He fits that offense well. The concern there for a lot of people is Tevin Coleman. And he's not as big of a concern for me now as he used to be, because I used to stay away from him. He freaked me out. I hate running back by committee systems. But when you look at it, Devonta Freeman got 72.1% of carries inside the 5-yard line. That's where it counts. That is it. I mean, that's where the touchdowns come from. That's where a lot of targets come from. And that's where they're using him. I think they like Tevin Coleman as a change of pace. I think they use him because they want to keep Freeman healthy. But I don't think that Coleman is going to come in and take over Freeman's job. I don't think his role is going to expand. In fact, I expect it will only shrink, especially from Coleman, who I believe he put on like 20 pounds before last season trying to become a better, solid running back, and yet they still went out and 72% of the time went with Freeman inside the 5-yard line. So that's less of a concern for me now than it has been in years past. I really like him at this spot. But that's where we've got him. What about Dalvin Cook?
Yeah, Devin Cook is a Vikings fan. I love nothing more for him to stay healthy and have a great year. Last year he was explosive before the injury. He finished with a yards per carry of 4.8. In 3 of 4 games, his yards per carry were actually 5.6, really solid. He showed good hands and good instincts in the passing game. I know he had a few drops, but he's a guy that they want to get more involved in the passing game. They clearly are going to use him. And the departure of Jerick McKinnon should keep his targets in the passing game at a high level. Jerick McKinnon takes 51 catches with him to San Francisco there, so I think that bodes well for Cook in the passing game. He was third in the league in rushing heading into week 3 before tearing his ACL. Now, the concerns that I have for him, coming out of college, I talked about how skilled, how explosive he was, but the one label coming out of college, or one criticism was, can he be durable? Well, he goes out in the first year and he tears his ACL. Now, by all reports, everything points to him being ready for the OTAs, although I don't think the Vikes are going to rush him back, but I think he'll definitely be ready. He's too good to pass on at this point. He's got too much talent to pass on. But if you were to draft him, I think you need to make sure that on your bench you have a really good third running back, or you need to handcuff him Latavius Murray. I think that'd be a wise move. With that said, he's very good, and I think the addition of Kirk Cousins will help keep defenses honest.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Last year, he was on pace to be the number 5 fantasy running back in the NFL had he continued to play. He was on pace for 1,400 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, 44 catches, and 360 receiving yards. Now, here's the funny thing. He's actually known for being a very good receiving running back, and he struggled the first few games, so I think those numbers get boosted. In fact, he didn't have 1 receiving touchdown, which obviously on pace means he wouldn't get one all year, but we know that's going to turn around. Other reasons that's going to turn around is 51 receptions are gone in Jerick McKinnon. 44 receptions is not bad for a rookie running back in Dalvin Cook, but it sure could have been a lot higher if McKinnon wasn't there stealing catches. He gets Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins loves to throw to his running backs. Chris Thompson had 39 receptions last year in 10 games, which put Chris Thompson on pace for 62 receptions in 16 games. So that bodes really, really well for him. So I think it's crazy that he was on pace to be, like, seriously guys, he was on pace to be the number 5 fantasy running back despite struggling in the passing game a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if he was capable of doing some of the numbers that we saw last year, that 4.8 yards per carry. He was on pace for about 8 rushing touchdowns, which is honestly somewhere where I see him in the running game, but I only expect him to get better and better in that passing game. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a few touchdowns and over 55 catches. So I really like Dalvin Cook here. I guess the only concern again is he going to recover? Is he going to get re-hurt? I'm excited to talk about this. Let's talk about Jordan Howard. We just talked about Dalvin Cook, who can catch well. And then we come to the flip side. Jordan Howard, a guy who is not known for what he does in the passing game. Why do you have him here? What do you think about him,
Yeah, this guy is a great pure runner. He does have deficiencies in the passing game there, but they're actually working on it. He's only 23 years old, and he's recorded 2,435 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns in 2 seasons. That's actually better than former Bears Gale Sanders and Walter Payton. Isn't that some great names to be mentioned with there?
Right.
And that's a phenomenal thing to consider. And I think those numbers are even more impressive when you consider just how bad this offense has been. The fact that he faces loaded boxes all the time. In 2017, he was second only behind Leonard Fournette in 8-man boxes he faced. 43% of his carries, he faced 8-man boxes. Okay, so obviously guys were stacking the line, yet he still was very productive there. I think with the inevitable development of Mitch Trubisky, I know that some of you kind of give some pushbacks in videos. I don't think Mitch Trubisky is going to be top 10. That's why we ranked him lower, but I definitely think he's going to improve. I think a new head coach, a new coordinator can improve that offense, and that can only help his production and lessen the 8-man boxes he's going to face this year. In his rookie season of 2016, no running back forced more missed tackles on running plays than Jordan Howard. I mean, a lot of people didn't realize that this guy was actually pretty elusive for a big physical back. He was ranked by fellow NFL players in the top 50 NFL players. In fact, he's ranked by other fellow players number 28th overall. I think that's a huge statement of his talent. Many experts would consider him the best pure runner among running backs. Not the best overall running back because of his deficiencies in the passing game, but just the best pure runner. He's only missed 1 game in the NFL, and that was a rookie, and it wasn't due to injury, so he's durable. And when he was in college, he only had 2 injuries. There were 2 sprains, so he's remained very healthy. He's 6 foot 224. He's got the size to be physical and handle 20, 25 carries a game that you need to do it in the NFL. Now, he said he's working hard in the offseason to improve his pass catching. Coach Nagy said that they're really working hard. He was never asked in college or high school to catch the ball, so this is kind of a new thing for him. If he could improve in that area, that would really bump him up quite a bit. So, for me, I look at Howard. I think he's a good safe play, a low injury risk. He's got a good ceiling in terms of production ability. What's your take on him, though?
Yeah, I completely agree. Watch our quarterback rankings video to see why we don't think that Mitchell Trubisky is going to take off and have an unbelievable season or be a great fantasy option, but I do think he'll get better. With additions in the receiving game, guys like Trey Burton, Allen Robinson, Taylor, Gabriel, and even Anthony Miller, that passing game will get better. With the 8-man boxes that Jordan Howard faced, if that passing game gets better, it's only going to help him. And I think that it will, and I think he should face less 8-man boxes. In fact, when I first learned that, I was surprised to see how productive he was last year. Another thing I love is for a physical, a tough runner, a pure runner, a guy who leans on that sort of playing style, he's been extremely, extremely healthy, which bodes very, very, very well for him. I absolutely love that. He's such a great runner. And he's in his third year in the NFL. He's only 23 right now. He's still very, very young. He is still developing. In fact, last year he had 5 100-yard rushing games. That is great, great numbers. Things are looking up for him. I had him in a keeper league. I traded him away. Guess now I'm kicking myself. Can't look back at the past too much, but at this point, obviously, I'd like to have him over the guys that I had because they were more of a one-year deal to go for a win in that league. But I guess they say you can win now or win later, can't win both. But
yeah, there's some guys that we said that you're going to bump up in PPR leagues. He's a guy that you're going to bump down in PPR leagues in your rankings. So, but I like the guy. I hope that he can figure it out in the passing game. I hope a new coach helps. He's fun to watch.
All right, now I know a lot of people are going to think this. Why are we not reaching on Ajayi? Why should he be here? Because a lot of people have him way lower than we do.
Okay, please look at me right now. Now, I know a lot of you are going to disagree, and we've heard that before, and at the end, if we were wrong, throw it in our face. But last year, we heard that with a lot of other things. The year before that, hear me when I say Ajayi is undervalued and overlooked. Okay, this guy, I'm convinced he's going to have a great year and be a steal for a lot of you out there. He really thrived in Philly last year in a limited role, although many consider last year to kind of be a bust. But I think that was more of a product of him being traded mid-season than it was to poor play. Now, before being traded, Miami had 2 100-yard rushing games. He had one game of 130 yards, one of 122, playing on a brutal Miami offense. Most games where Jay Cutler really stalled that offense. Now, after his trade, his yards per carry jumped from 3.4 to 5.8 with the Eagles. Now, his overall totals weren't great. That was due to a few factors. One, the Eagles didn't need to rely on him. They had Blunt and some other guys there, so they didn't really need to rely on him a lot. He didn't need to carry the ball 25 times per game. Another thing he started slow in Philadelphia was due most to the fact that he had a hard time learning the playbook. Rumors he struggled in pass protection, so it took him a while. The first 4 weeks in Philadelphia, his carries were single digits, but then his next 5 consecutive weeks, he had double-digit carries. That trend should continue now that Garrett Blunt is gone there. Now, Eagles assistant head coach and running backs coach Deuce Staley suggested that Ajayi will be the workhorse this season for that team. Ajayi had an impressive showing at OTAs this offseason. Head coach Doug Peterson mentioned multiple times what great shape the running back was in. In 2016, now listen to this, this is amazing. This guy exploded for 3 200-yard games in Miami for a below-average offense. Only 3 other players have ever done that: Tiki Barber, Earl Campbell, and O.J. Simpson. Here's another stat that you need to listen to. He has a 2.4 yards after contact since entering the league. That's best among all backs with 500-plus carries during that span. Better than any running back in the NFL, his yards after contact. I mean, this guy's been really good. He's got solid hands. Carson Wentz, getting him back, I think is going to ensure that defenses can't load the box. It's going to open up a lot of passing lanes because, to be honest, Carson Wentz is who you're in a game plan to stop if you're the defensive coordinator there. At least that's what I feel like. I look at this guy, I see 1,600 combined yards and 10 to 12 TDs easily. He's only 24 years old. I think he's got a great opportunity. He's being overlooked. He's got a high ceiling. What do you think about this guy?
You covered a lot. I don't have a whole lot to add. Now, first of all, last year I hate to say don't count last year, but with playing for a terrible Miami team and then switching teams and then getting used to it, earning your role, learning the offense, it's really hard for us to look at last year and say that was any representation of who he is beside little things. So let's look at 2016. In 2016, he averaged 6.36 yards per carry against 8-man boxes. That's insane. It's like he gets better the more guys you put against him. It's like he just gets angry. He's the Hulk or whatever. But on top of that, he's such a physical runner with 901 yards after contact. That was second best in the league. And first in missed tackles in 2016. He forced 58 missed tackles. He is such a good runner. Now he's going to finally spend a full season in an offense that will actually help him perform. I mean, he's going to be huge. I think this is a very good spot for him to be in.
Yeah, I think another thing we didn't mention, but I think it's odd. When they traded for him last year, it was kind of surprising because Philadelphia looked good. They had running backs. They didn't need him. They went out and aggressively got this guy. And like Garrett Blount, obviously they like him. They see something in him, and they plan on using him this year. I think he's going to have a great year.
Yeah, exactly. All right, here's another guy, Alex Collins, the last guy in our tier 2. A lot of people think he's going to bust this year, that last year was a fluke. We both agree he is not a fluke. Why is he not a fluke? Why is he come into this tier, the last guy, to kind of cap us off?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think he's a fluke. I think he's got a legitimate running back one potential there. Many forget that his rookie year with Seattle, he looked really good in the preseason and in with some limited playing during the regular season. In fact, it was kind of surprising that Seattle let him go and he wasn't brought back. Now, last year's yards per carry, 4.6, was very good. Now, early, he was rarely used in passing situations. In fact, a lot of times early in the season, he didn't get a lot of play. And the reason why is he fumbled the ball a couple times early on, but he eventually worked through that. They increased his carries. Now, as it went on, he got more involved in the passing game. In fact, all of his catches came after week 9. You take his catches from week 9 on, you project that over 16 games, he had 41 catches. That's pretty solid. It's not spectacular, but it's decent. All 6 of his touchdowns came in the last 7 games. He had an excellent college career at Arkansas and left after his junior year. But I think the most encouraging news for me, it tells me a lot about what we don't see. Okay, we look at stats, numbers, or reports, but we're not there with the team. We're not in practice. So we don't see what the coaches see. They went out, okay, and during the draft, the Ravens didn't take a running back. They didn't pick one up via free agency. And so for me, that bodes really well that they feel high on this guy. Now, another thing that could help him is last year, look at the team really struggled last year. Flacco was brutal. Okay, so I got to imagine he's going to improve there. The offensive line was beat up. I think they're going to improve there. So better play from the nonsense of offensive line, better play with Joe Flacco. I think all those things bode well. You give him an entire season, the number 1 guy. I think this guy's going to get 1,000 yards and be a quality play as an RB1. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I have to add to that is kind of some sneaky plays the Ravens have been doing this offseason. Focusing on that trench, that offensive line is going to be much improved. They're going to get Marshall Yanda back, who is probably the best guard in the league. I love him. Maybe I'm biased. I just really like him, have for a long time. They went out in the draft and got Orlando Brown, who I felt was the best offensive lineman in the draft. I think he's going to be fantastic. And then they got some smaller name guys in the line, James Hurst and Matt Skura. I think there's going to be a much healthier and much improved offensive line, which of course is going to seriously feed into Alex Collins playing very well this year. But I think that about rounds us out now for Tier 2. Let's get into our Tier 3 guys. All right, so now we start off. The first guy in our Tier 3 is Joe Mixon. I don't have a whole lot to say about him. I say, there are a few guys you didn't want to talk about. One guy I didn't want to talk about, Joe Mixon, so I guess this one's mostly on you.
Yeah,
no pressure, though.
Yeah, I'll get to Joe Mixon. There are definitely question marks there. That's why he's Tier 3, not Tier 2. He has a few more question marks than everybody else. He disappointed a lot of owners last year, finished with only 626 rushing yards. He had a very low yards per carry of 3.5 with only 4 TDs. But I think he's going to have a breakout second year. I'll get into that in a second. I'll tell you why I think that's going to be the case. Now, barring an injury or suspension, almost be impossible not to improve on his rookie year. So right away, the bar is just set low there, right?
That's not a reason to rank him here. You know that, right?
I know it's not, but he's going to get better, obviously. Now, in his final season with Oklahoma, he rushed for 1,274 yards, and he had a yards per carry of 6.8. He logged an elite target share of 11.7, and he was touted by a lot of scouts as being the best running back in that class. Now, the reason why he dropped down, there were concerns over domestic violence. That's why he dropped down. But by a lot of people, they felt like he could arguably be the number 1 running back coming out of the draft last year. Now, he had a really low yards per carry of 3.5, but he showed signs of improvement. His last 4 games, his yards per carry ballooned to 5.01. He hit his stride in Week 11. He had his first 100-yard game of the year against Cleveland. Now, some would say, well, it's the Browns. Everybody does well against them. But he followed that up with some good games against some good defenses. Also, I think it's important to know that Cleveland was good against the run last year. Last year, they're 7th in rush defense, allowing only 98 yards per game. Now, the next week after that, in Week 12, he started the game with 7 carries for 34 yards. He had yards per carry of 4.9. Goes out, gets hurt, misses the remainder of the game, and doesn't return until Week 16. Okay, comes out Week 16, only plays part of the game, leaves with an ankle injury. Okay, comes back the week after that, finishes the season against a very good Ravens defense, who is 6th in total defense. He just misses 100 rushing yards with 96 in the game. His last 4 games, he finished with a yards per carry of 5.1, so I think that looked really good. But I think his overall struggles in the year really weren't his fault. I think the overall offense struggled. They were brutal. The Bengals struggled, and that's why they brought a new offensive coordinator. The Bengals finished 26th in scoring. They only scored 15 total points in the first 3 weeks. They were brutal. The Bengals' offensive line was a big cause for the struggles. If you take a look at the real struggles that he had, was really the offensive line. Pro Football Focus ranked their offensive line 28th last year. They had a league 32nd ranked offense. They were bad in terms of yards per carry, yards per game, things like that. They sorely missed the offensive linemen Andrew Whitworth and Kevin Zittler. This offseason, they improved the offensive line, acquiring tackle Cordy Glenn via the trade from Buffalo Bills. They brought in Dallas offensive line coach Frank Pollock. And they're going to kind of bring in running style very similar we saw in Dallas, kind of smash mouth in your face running game that he specializes with Dallas. Now Mixon had a 5.4 yards created per carry. It's a metric that playerprofiler.com uses to measure how many yards a running back creates after evading his first tackle. He ranked 13th in the league in 2017. Okay, ranking 13 that metric helps you to isolate a running back's talent from his offensive line play. It's a really good indicator of his individual talent. Last year he was constantly being hit behind the line of scrimmage. That really wasn't his fault. He had such a low yards per carry. Now he's 6'1", 228. He's got the size, all the skills that he can be a 3-down back in the NFL. And he has added value in PPR leagues. He was somewhat effective. He had 30 catches last year, which for a rookie's not great, but it's decent. So I think Mixon's going to recover and be a good year. I think he's a guy right now that they drafted to be their franchise running back, and that's why I like him. Not quite tier 2, but I do have him at tier 3, and he's good enough to really bump into that tier 2 this year if everything falls into place. So anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, there you go, guys. I mean, that's basically everything you need to know about Joe Mixon. The only thing I would add to that is that's a bit of a risky pick. He does have a low floor, he does have a high ceiling, and that is one of those picks where if you're at a certain point in a draft and Mixon's out there, you have to decide yourself, am I looking for that one guy to short my running game and move on, or am I taking a chance to hit a home run? Do I really trust Mixon? I guess that's what you have to decide, but I think you really summed it up there, lots of information.
Well, we talk about how important it is to have a good running backs in your team. They really make or break your season. We're sitting here, pick number 15, we're in tier 3, and you see already the quick fall off in terms of running back talent. There's a lot of question marks. So that's why I like to secure a couple good running backs because, yeah, these guys could have good years, but there's so many question marks.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about Christian McCaffrey? He's a guy who took 8th overall in last year's draft. And I kind of bought on the hype maybe a bit more than I should have. He did perform well, but he definitely let me down at least a little bit. With 80 receptions, he finished 3rd in the NFL. It is clear that he is so dominant in that way. He finished the season with 435 yards on 3.7 yards per carry, only 2 rushing touchdowns. So he wasn't fantastic, but I really like what I saw towards the end of the season. The last 8 games, he had 68 carries, 388 rushing yards on 4.6 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns, plus another 3 touchdowns receiving. So if had he done that for the whole season, he would have had a pretty good year. 136 carries, 776 yards on 4.6 yards per carry, 8 rushing touchdowns, and 6 receiving. It's clear to me that Christian McCaffrey is not a great, just straight up pounding running back. I don't know if he ever will be. But I do like that that pace is a combined 14 touchdowns. It's clear to me with his ability to catch that he's one of those guys who I think for the rest of his career is going to be one of those end zone guys. But then again, really struggling in the running game. What do you have to add to that? And I guess what do you really make of that?
Yeah, he had a really a tale of 2 seasons last year in terms of running game. First 8 games he struggled greatly running the ball. His yards per carry was 2.39, but the last 8, I think you pointed that out there, is 4.68. So that's pretty solid. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he improved in the games there. I do see him maybe struggling in running game throughout his career, although reports are in the offseason he put on 20 pounds of muscle so he could be more physical and durable. If that's the case, once again, 20 pounds of muscle is a lot to put on in the offseason, although I hear that right away. My first thought is PEDs, but anyways, that's a whole other joke. But now Jonathan Stewart is gone. They signed C.J. Anderson. I think C.J. Anderson is going to really take that role that Stewart had last year, except I think he's going to actually be more effective in that role. I like Anderson. Stewart was at the end of his career there. He really struggled. Now, McCaffrey's a stud in the passing game. A rookie had 80 catches, 651 yards. He may struggle to run the ball, but I think that Christian McCaffrey in PPR and full PPR leagues is a top 10 or 15 running back. He does fall off in standards, though. Like a lot of the guys we mentioned, I like him. I think he's got a lot of potential. He's somebody you need to watch. You can't ignore, but he does have a few question marks. I do wonder how good he'll be between the tackles in his career.
All right, well, that's a solid one. Here's another guy who I don't think has question marks. It just has to be where do you put him, and that's Mark Ingram. The 4-game suspension, I don't think there's question marks about his play, his talent, the system. It's just how much do you take away from him for that 4-game suspension? I was really shocked looking at when we come into this offseason, he finished 7th in receptions. fifth in rushing yards, first in rushing touchdowns, and sixth in overall fantasy points. I think the big one there is seventh in receptions. A lot of people saw him as this brutal running back, this kind of like this bruiser, solid runner, but Kamara is going to get the catches. But at seventh, he was still effective in the passing game. So just the way he was able to get both things done, it does leave me to wonder, and personally, because this is a bit more of you did these rankings a bit more, of course I have my say, and I tend to just leave it as much as I can. I only make anyways, I would want to move Mark Ingram up a little bit because of how effective he was last year, but I know you have your reasons to put him here, so I guess I'll just stop talking and let you give your reasons.
Yeah, Mark Ingram is really confusing for me at this point. Now, he disappointed the first 3 years in the league, disappointed a lot of people. He developed into a very good running back. His yards per carry are excellent the last 2 years. He's at 4.98 yards per carry. His overall yardage totals have been solid. He's good in the passing game, like you said, averaging 51 catches the last 3 years. He had double-digit touchdowns the last 2 years. Now, the one thing that I did think about, I don't have in my notes here, this guy struggled the first 3 years, and then boom, his career takes off. He did get suspended for 4 games for
PEDs.
Like, you got to wonder how much of that production could have been that. Will you see a different production if those numbers were boosted by PEDs? But we'll have to see, obviously. Putting that aside, Ingram and Kamara had historic seasons last year. Okay, now that's a lot of offense to really duplicate in back-to-back years. They combined for 25 touchdowns, 139 catches, and 3,094 total yards. I just don't see that that's going to happen. As good as those guys are, and I like both of them, that's a lot of offense to duplicate. Defensive coordinators are going to begin to plan a little bit. So I would see maybe a drop-off statistically between the two, just simply the fact that defenses are going to have to find a way to shut them down.
Yeah, here's the thing right now, where we have him ranked, that puts him at 17th overall. I don't care the concerns that we have for him. If I basically am taking the 17th best running back, whatever it looks like, if he's my second running back or even my third, but if he's my second running back, like, I'm still happy with Mark Ingram. I still think he's a good option. But this next guy now, do you have anything more to say?
Yeah, a few more things
Ingram?
I want to add to that just real briefly there. I think looking at Kamara this year, I think there's going to be a dip in the numbers for Ingram before the suspension. Even I was saying that Kamara will probably carve out a bigger role. He's younger and early on appears to be more talented. Now, he does have a 4-game suspension. We talked about that a bit. Now, you would like to have him ranked a little bit higher, but I have him actually still ranked higher than most mock drafts. He's fallen actually quite a bit lower than this. I want to say this, though, for people that love Alvin Kamara, you're just hating on Ingram. And I said this when I talked about Alvin Kamara. They're not going to wear down Alvin Kamara with 20 and 25 carries a game. I guarantee when Ingram comes back, they're going to make sure he gets his carries. They want to divide up. They want to keep their guy healthy. So don't forget this guy, okay? Don't overlook Mark Ingram. Somebody's going to take this guy later on, sit him on their bench in week 5. They're going to have a great running back there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of suspensions, here's a guy who's about to get suspended. Yeah. And when he does, we are going to bump him down. But at this point, he's here because he hasn't been suspended yet. We don't know how long it's going to be for. We just don't know the whole story. But LeSean McCoy, what do you think about him, I guess, apart from the suspension,
Yeah, so I'll get to it. He was actually in Tier 2. We bumped in Tier 3 based on some information we found out today, and you guys are hearing about already. I'm sure you've already heard it on the news. We'll get to that in a bit. But before this, here's kind of what we said about him. He's a great running back who's had a great career, but at age 30, that's usually when running backs begin to decline. Now, his yards per carry was the lowest of his career last year, 4.0, probably a sign of things to come. What also hurts his weapons around him. Peterman, Allen, and McCarron are not proven quarterbacks. That doesn't sound good. Their wide receivers are very weak. It makes it easy for defenses to really focus on him. With that said, he's far too talented to ignore. He's had 441 career receptions, 6 seasons at over 1,000 rushing yards. Last year, he had 1,000 rushing yards, and 3 times he had double-digit TDs. So that was kind of our take, is he's getting older. There's a major concern, fall off. He doesn't have a lot of talent around him. Of course, then today, it came out that it's beginning to tread. There's reports out there, once again, that have been proven, reports of PED use and domestic violence with some graphic pictures of his ex that came out. Does not look good. The NFL has launched an investigation, and so now he carries a lot of risk. We're going to watch the situation closely, but I won't be that surprised by next week if this guy's sitting around number 30, 35 in the rankings.
Yeah, that's one thing. Go follow our Instagram. I'll make sure to keep you guys updated on that. One more thing on LeSean McCoy. Did you know he led the NFL in 2 statistics last year?
What's that?
One was most times tackled behind the line of scrimmage, and the other one was most lost yards on plays tackled behind the line of scrimmage. Not things you want to lead the NFL in, but he had 55 times he was tackled behind the line of scrimmage for a total of negative 133 yards. that right there, I think, is another big concern, just to add in there and tack on top of the whole Sunday that is stay away from LeSean McCoy right now.
Yeah, those are some pretty telling statistics. I think, once again, I don't even blame him for that. It's that offense is brutal, honestly. And if you're a defensive coordinator, what are you going to say? You're going to load the box. You're going to do whatever you can. You're going to key him. You're probably going to even have a linebacker shadow. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to shut down LeSean McCoy. That's probably why he was tackled behind the line of scrimmage 55 times.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, now let's talk about the next guy, Kenyan Drake.
Okay, Kenyan Drake. Okay, let me get to him there on mine. So,
or do we have somebody else up as well?
Yeah, we skipped over a guy here in our standings.
Is it Jerick McKinnon?
Jerick McKinnon that we skipped over.
Okay, yeah. I apologize. That's my bad.
All right. Well, we'll talk about Jerick McKinnon here. We gotta throw him in there real quick, and we don't have the numbers, but you see Jerick McKinnon is a guy that we're gonna talk about there. We have him actually right after LeSean McCoy, but if you actually go to your website, you'll see him right there. But let's just talk about him, and then we'll get to the next guy, and these falls into tier 3. You look at former San Francisco 49ers signed former Minnesota Vikings Jerick McKinnon to a 4-year, $30 million deal. Now, he filled in very nicely last year for Dalvin Cook, but that sounds like a lot of running back money for a guy that hasn't been proven yet. Now, all things point at this point to him becoming the starting running back there. Kyle Shanahan has said McKinnon is their starter right now and a guy they want to feature in that offense. That bodes well that your coach is saying, hey, he's a guy that we want to feature. We spent good money on him. We see him. Now, his strength is in the passing game. Last year, he had 51 catches. That was really good. Now, his style of play fits Shanahan's style really well. He's very similar to Devonta Freeman, who thrived with Shanahan as offensive coordinator there. Now, the concerns I have for him is, can he handle the bigger role? He's not a big physical back. He's a bit larger than Matt Breida, but neither one of those are big physical backs. They're similar in size and skill set. I mean, they might bleed statistics from one another. Jerick would be a huge play in PPR leagues, but in standards, there are concerns. In PPR leagues, I see him as a running back 2, but in standards, he's a running back 3. That's kind of where I've got him. Any thoughts?
Yeah, one thing is, do not underestimate what Coach Shanahan said for 3 reasons. First of all, it's just good to know any coach says that about a player that they really want to get him involved and use him a lot in that offense is huge, along with the money. 2, Shanahan's a good offensive coach. I mean, that's what he does. We saw what happened when he left Atlanta. There became a huge struggle the very next year on Matt Ryan's part. So I think he's not just some idiot coach who's just talking. Like, he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. And then finally, you already said it. He fits the system so well. System fit is something that fantasy players don't focus enough on, because you do have to be a student of the game, watch film just to watch film, study the X's and O's and things like that. But he very, very fluidly fits that offense. But like you said, he's really just a PPR guy. 3.8 yards per carry, that is not desirable at all. Anyways, I think that about rounds out Jerick McKinnon. Unless you have anything to add,
nope.
Let's move on to Drake then. What do you think of Kenyan Drake?
Yeah, so I was big on this guy, still pretty big on him, but after Ajayi was traded, Kenyan Drake had a 5-game stretch that he exploded for 444 yards. That was more than any other running back during that same 5-game stretch. He had a very good yards per carry, 4.88 during that, and he had 17 catches he added to that, so he's used both in the passing game and the running game. But here's what I liked during that same 4 or 5-game stretch there. It included an average of 2.67 yards after first contact. That's an excellent statistic as far as his ability to continue getting yards after being contacted. Now, he's a former Alabama back. Now, he's got the tools, decent size to be running back 1. And after they traded Ajayi and he did well, maybe a little sensor, maybe they saw something in him, whatnot. The coaches have been boasting that this guy's really matured, not only on and off the field. They really like this guy. I was huge on him. Now, the one concern, they went out and they drafted Kalen, I think his name is Blaj. How you say that?
Yeah,
Blaj?
something like that. It doesn't really matter.
I know you're going to get us for getting the pronunciation right, whatever. You're still watching the video. We're over an hour at this point, so whatever. And I think that running back, he's got some serious skills, and he's big at 230 pounds. That's a slight concern. I'm going to watch that situation closely, but I really do like Kenyan Drake. He did a lot last year. I think he's a guy that could be a real great play.
Yeah, I think the only thing I had to tack onto that is that 5-game stretch was pretty phenomenal. 4.8 yards per carry. That pace goes out to 1,400 yards and 54 catches. I think it says a lot. We love Ajayi here, but Ajayi only averaged 3.4 yards per carry while he was there, and Kenyan Drake over that last stretch averaged 4.88. So I think that tells us a lot that, like, we really like Ajayi, but I also think that Kenyan Drake can also be a good option. It's always a concern when a team brings in a rookie running back, though, so that leaves me kind of bipolar, half thinking he could explode and half thinking he might lose the job. Maybe I just have a bad history with running backs, but that definitely does concern me. He's a guy at this point where he he's absolutely worth taking a shot. Do you want 4-game suspended Mark Ingram? Do you want LeSean McCoy, who's going to drop? Do you want to risk it on Darius Guice? I mean, Kenyan Drake is absolutely worth a shot at this point. I'd like that pick.
Yeah, one thing that bodes well for Drake, they said about Kalen at this point, is the coach said he's got a lot to learn in terms of pass protection. They felt if you can't pass protect, that's going to keep you off the field. And so if he's struggling to learn pass protection, that bodes well for Kenyan Drake. So
yeah. All right, well, now let's talk about our next guy. I just mentioned him, Darius Guice, I believe. I always want to call him Gucci. That's not right. I don't know where that comes from me, but let's just talk about him and ignore the way I say it.
Yeah, so let's talk about Darius here. Okay, so you look at the running backs team currently. Kelly is not great. Samaje Perine really underwhelmed his rookie year. Perine had 2 good games, but he still only finished with the yards per carry at 3.4. And that really kind of opened up the door for Darius at this point. Now, he didn't put up big numbers in college in terms of receiving the ball, but that doesn't matter. I don't care how good a receiver he is. That's Chris Thompson's role on that team, and Chris Thompson does it very well. So this guy's brought in to be really, he's going to carry the ball on first, second downs. His running style, they compare him to Arian Foster. That's great company to be mentioned with at this point. Now, he would have been drafted in the first round. A lot of people felt that he's got that sort of talent. But concerns over off-the-field issues surfaced. It caused him to drop a little bit. Now it sounds to me like those off-the-field issues weren't that big of a deal, and it sounds like he's got his head on straight and he's going to be okay. Now, prior to the NFL draft, he was touted by many experts as the second-best running back behind Saquon Barkley. That's huge, obviously. He fell in the second round. He's got great size, 5'11", 224. He's got what they call extraordinary size adjustment speed. He falls in the 91st percentile there. Another site compared him to Ezekiel Elliott. Once again, another guy it's great to be compared to. He was productive at LSU. During LSU there, he rushed for 2,638 yards in his final 2 years, averaged 6.3 yards per carry against top-notch competition. This is not a weak thing. LSU played some really good competition. If his head on straight, I think he could become the starting back and be a steal for Washington owners. Now, update on 6/13/18. Redskins coach Jay Gruden said he's been very excited watching second round running back Darius catch the football. And so the one deficiency he had was in the passing game, but even there it looks like he's already making progress. So this guy is in a great situation to become the RB1 there if everything goes well.
Yeah, the bad is with Samaje Perine, Chris Thompson, Capri Bibbs, Rob Kelly. There are so many names there. That's the downside. But here are 2 things that I think are good. First of all, I really like that Alex Smith is his quarterback. And here's why. Last year with Kirk Cousins, it was the Kirk Cousins offense. He threw the ball a lot. That's what they like to do. And I'm not insulting Alex Smith. Alex Smith is a good quarterback. He will keep the chains moving. He's going to throw the ball well. He's going to be effective. But he's never thrown the ball as much as Kirk Cousins. So I think with Alex Smith there, he's going to keep that offense moving, but they're also going to be leaning on the run game, and they are looking for that running back. And again, with Chris Thompson being the guy in the receiving game, he was on pace for 62 catches. Like, that's just not going to be in the books for Darius for sure. But I learned a lesson last year. I did drafts. I did one draft before Spencer Ware got hurt. I did one draft, and I completely avoided Kareem Hunt because I was just, Spencer Ware's there. I thought, he's really talented, but I need something to happen. What are the odds that Ware is going to get hurt? But I was absolutely wrong, and I think that there is a time and a place and in the draft to just say, this guy's talented, I'm going to take him because if an opportunity comes along, he will take it.
Can I give you a better example of that?
You have a better? Okay.
I'm going to give you a better example of that. Okay, a guy that's out there, a lot of people said, this guy's got talent, looks great in the preseason, but he's third in the depth chart. He's never going to really see the field significantly. I believe that. I avoided Alvin Kamara for that reason.
Yeah.
Because he had Ingram and Adrian Peterson ahead of him, and even though he looked great and everybody talked about how talented he was, I thought, this guy's not going to see that many carries. We couldn't have been more wrong about that.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just got to put talented players on your bench and hope and see.
You do. Hopefully we learned our lesson on that, but maybe not. Let's move on and talk about Isaiah Crowell. Now, you brought up Isaiah Crowell in the top 25 as we went through our rankings, and forgive me, I was in a weird moment. I was like, why? He's got so many running backs in Cleveland. I'm like, you idiot, he's playing for the Jets, which I can't believe I did that. I guess that's why I should always have a computer in front of me. That's why I don't try to memorize anything. It was just a bad moment or whatever. But I do like him playing for the Jets now. And you did a lot of research on him, and you were kind of the first to catch on to this. So why do we like him for the
Yeah,
Jets?
I've got a few things. I'm not going to get big into some deep statistics, but I'm going to say this right now. I like Isaiah Crowell. Mark my words, he will be the starting running back with Powell serving as a third down, change of pace back. Okay, that's just going to happen right now. If you look at Isaiah Crowell, coming off a bad Cleveland team in a bad situation, he had a healthy 4.2 yards per carry playing for the Woeful Browns during his career. He's showing he's capable in the passing game. He's still young at 25. I think this year he breaks 1,000 rushing yards. He's never finished worse than 27th at that position in rushing yards, and top 20 each of his past 2 years. He's averaging a healthy 4.7 yards per carry in his past 2 seasons. Now he's slipping, and I think he's got huge sleeper appeal. I think he's somebody that you need to grab. I think he's going to be very good. The one concern I have for him, I think he's in a great situation, but the Jets are another one that, like a lot of teams out there in the NFL, like Buffalo and others, that the quarterback situation is a little bit iffy right now. But they're way better than Buffalo in terms of the talent and weapons they have on that team there. But I do like Isaiah Crowell. He's slipping really, really far.
Yeah, he is. That's a solid pick right there. Here's another guy who I really like who's slipping in drafts, and that's Dion Lewis. Just went from the New England Patriots, where in 2017 he had 897 rushing yards on 5.0 yards per carry. He had 6 touchdowns, 36 catches, 214 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. So he actually had 9 touchdowns total and passed 1,000 yards. I really like him, and I think this position fits well for him. Now, he had those numbers in a running back by committee system, which is great, and was really able to show off that's not even a problem for him, that he is so effective. And then Tennessee goes out in this offseason, and we really bumped him up our rankings when they paid for when they signed him to a 4-year, $20 million contract. Of course, if you're watching this far in the video, you probably love fantasy. You probably already know that. I'm not surprising you. As we've said in the past, follow the money. They didn't give him $20 million to sit on the bench. He has a role in that offense, especially with it's very clear that the Titans are not happy with Derrick Henry. Some people are hyped on Henry, and I'm sorry, I hate to tell people that the guy they're excited about isn't going to be good or whatever, but last year, despite the fact that DeMarco Murray had 3.6 yards per carry, he still got 8 more carries than Derrick Henry. And here's why. Derrick Henry only had 11 receptions last year. That's awful. Because of how one-dimensional Henry is, they had to bring in a guy like Lewis. Now, Henry's still going to get 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. There's a reason that Dion Lewis is not much higher than this. There's a reason he's not a tier 2 guy, because Henry's going to get his touches. But Dion Lewis has been productive. He shows his ability to catch out of the backfield and to be effective in the red zone. I think some people think he's going to disappear this season in the red zone. That could not be more wrong. Last year he had 35 attempts, 142 yards, and 6 touchdowns in the red zone, despite only getting 1/3 of red zone carries from the Patriots. He is so effective in the red zone because he can run so well and he can catch so well that I think he's a guy with a low ceiling and a high floor in this top 25. Unless something happens to Derrick Henry, Henry's going to take a little bit away, but he's too talented not to crack the top 25 in my book.
Yeah, I like Dion Lewis. I don't have a lot. You covered it well there. He's not big, so I don't see him going over 200 carries in the season. I think maybe more like 150, 175 carries, and used a lot in the passing game. I could see statistically each game where his carries are maybe 12 to 15 with 5 to 7 targets. So I think that's where he's at. But definitely they brought him in to use this guy. So I agree with a lot of what you're saying there. So.
All right, now what about the Colts running back Marlon Mack? That's kind of a goofy backfield.
Yeah, that's one that we're gonna have to really monitor closely. We're gonna monitor that closely as the season gets closer. I'm not big on this guy, but half the battle in fantasy is opportunity, and currently he sits as the #1 running back there. Now, last year he looked really good in the passing game, and at moments he looked explosive and showed home run ability. But he also struggled to run the ball at times. Now, max yards per carry weren't great last season, but Chris Ballard invested a lot of resources into the offensive line to improve the Colts' running game this year. I think that's good. I also think getting Andrew Luck back should help significantly, taking pressure off of defenses. Now, he has some rookie competition, but currently he stands as a starter, which is really half the battle in fantasy. You can have all the talent you want, but if you're not seeing the field, if you're not getting carries, it doesn't really matter. And right now, he stands to be the starting guy, but we're going to monitor that closely. I wouldn't be all that surprised if we fluctuate him in our rankings as the season gets closer.
Yeah, exactly. Unless something changes, I'm not too excited about him having a fantastic season. Put simply, the biggest thing that makes me nervous with the running back is other running backs. And I don't like that the Colts went out. They got Hines, they got Wilkin, they still have Robert Turbin. I have him here in my notes. It says quite simply, there are a lot of possible replacements for him, a lot of possible guys who can take the job over him. Of course, Turbin's suspension
For 4 games,
for
yeah.
4 games means that he won't be a problem the first 4 games, but then thereafter he will. And so you do have to wonder why the Colts felt the need to bring in 2 other running backs. Why have 4 guys on your depth chart that could possibly take that job? Well, probably because none of them are playing fantastic. So for me, unless something changes, it's like not too comfortable with Mack. Hopefully he'll fall to me. Maybe I'll take a chance on him, but I definitely want to avoid trying to take him too high. Now, what about this last guy? Really boring pick here, Lamar Miller.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about why I hate the guy. Not the guy personally, but why I hate him as a fantasy
Why
football
I
player.
think he's a terrible person.
Yeah,
No.
I know why I don't like him. But then I'm going to at the very end tell you why we had to put him number 25. So let's talk about Lamar Miller. He's had a steady statistical decline since 2014. Now, in that year, his yards per carry 5.1. After that, dropped to 4.5 to 4.0. And then last year, career worst 3.7. If you watch the Texans play last year, he looked slow. He lacked explosiveness. When he played for Miami, coaches there, when he played for the Dolphins, said that they were concerned he couldn't handle the greater workload, that his numbers would decline. It appears that they actually knew exactly what they were talking about there, because as he's increased his carries, his production has fallen. What might be the death blow to him eventually is going to be the play of Foreman. Foreman actually started to look really good last year and get comfortable in the NFL, but he had an Achilles injury that ended his season. Now, each week, the Texans seem to be moving Foreman more and more into that starting role. Foreman's big and physical at 6'2", 235. In his final game before getting injured, right, he was having a huge game. He had 10 carries, 65 yards, and 2 TDs. If you watch the game last year, he just looked far and away more effective and explosive compared to Miller. What does bode well for Miller, though, is that Foreman, that Achilles injuries are very difficult to come back from and take a long time to recover. It would sound like to me that Foreman's not going to be ready for the start of the year. That opens the door for Miller. So simply by being the starting running back at the beginning of the season, he must be worth considering drafting. I think also the development of quarterback Watson there could help significantly, taking pressure off of him. Don't overreach for him. Don't overpay for this guy. But he's definitely a guy that you probably want to take a look at. And if you draft him, I would handcuff Foreman on that team together. So.
Well, that's what I was just thinking. For me, the primary use of Lamar Miller is taking Foreman as a dynasty guy, as a guy that you're going to sit on and wait, and taking Miller to fill in that role until then. And I think that's got to be his biggest potential as far as value to your fantasy team. He's getting older. He's not going to get any better, but as a solid guy to buy you some time until Foreman comes around, I definitely really like him for that at number 25. So that's it. That's our 25. We can't wait to move on and talk about more guys, and we're excited as far as we're starting to get into a place where, you know, we can hit some of those late round gems and some guys who are really low on the depth chart, and talk about players that we're excited about. Hopefully guys you don't know something about every guy. You will know a lot about them. But as always, we thank you guys so much for watching. Rob, do you have anything to say before we close?
No, that's it. Obviously, we love all you guys out there. Like, subscribe, share with your friends. Check things out at our website. We're going to put some new things out there soon. Once again, thank you guys so much. God bless and take care.